Hello. Welcome to week 2 for PSL 6240, Political Violence and Terrorism. Before we get started with a review and preview for next week, I just want to hit some admin points. First, for the first week, good posts so far on the discussion board. I think that's pretty much exactly what I'm looking for, about 500 words for your initial post, and then a continuing conversation with your classmates on the discussion board. So keep it up. The one thing I would say is, the topics get a little esoteric from here on in. Now, next week we're going to be talking a lot more history, so you can't just it's not more personal opinion. It's more how you relate to the posts and how you relate to the material. So keep in mind. And then the other thing, just as the semester goes on, the posts tend to drop off. People don't respond to each other. People don't post on time. The posts aren't very thorough. So that's I'd ask that you keep up the same effort that you did for this first week. The only thing I will say is, and most of you did this, but not all of you did this, is show me in your posts that you have watched the lecture or watched the PowerPoint lecture. Interact with it, cite the lecture, interact with it, agree with it, disagree with it. You know, however you want to couch it. But let me know that you've at least seen it and you can apply that to the discussion questions. So I ask again, everyone does that from here on in. A second admin question is the Adobe Connect session. Again, this Thursday, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you all should have the link to the Adobe Connect. So the one thing I ask is that you just fire it up and make sure it works before we have the Adobe Connect session. If you can't make it, please let me know, and please let me know as soon as possible so we can at least record it and we can get it to you via YouTube or a podcast. But I do want to have those Adobe Connect sessions. I will be posting an agenda for the Adobe Connect this week on Tuesday, or no later than Tuesday. And what I can tell you so far is that what I'm going to talk about in detail is that what is a terrorist, what is not a terrorist discussion. When I have that discussion here, when I do it in person in DC, I always get a lot of feedback and a lot of very, very heated discussion between students, between myself and students, on why do we consider someone a terrorist? Why do we consider someone a freedom fighter? Why do we consider this crime a crime? Why do we consider this normal? Why do we consider this terrorism? And I love those discussions. So please come prepared, and please come with your debating skills into that discussion. And the more you're prepared for that discussion, the better, the more leg up you'll have on your papers, which will be your first paper topic, will be on terrorism. What is a terrorism? What is terrorism? What is not terrorism? Why do we consider certain people terrorists and others not? So I look forward to that. And if there's any, again, technology issues, time zone issues, please let me know. So just the review of last week, I think everyone, we had a good debate on the discussion boards. And I think most people, not all, but most people agree that terrorism was kind of a psychology issue. It's how we reacted to terrorism that determined whether it was an existential threat or not. Again, a 9/11, yeah, people die in it and it's tragic, but unless you let that affect you, you let this affect the society, then it becomes the more existential threat. And I think everyone kind of, not everyone, but most people kind of levitated to that answer. Just a couple of things I took away. Someone said, and I can't remember who said this, but there's no shootings. Whenever there's a shooting in a movie theater, or there's a shooting in the Aurora, Colorado, movie sales didn't dip. However, if it was a terrorist bombing a movie theater, even if there was less casualties, movie sales would probably go down considerably. And I think that kind of jumped in, and that illustrated that psychological impacts. I know Josh brought it in the perfect day scenario, which I believe is how a terrorist can affect our way of life. You can imagine if 10 school buses were blown up simultaneously on Monday morning. On Tuesday, even though statistically it's very unlikely that your child would be injured, statistically on Tuesday, I guarantee you a third of the country, half the country might be keeping their kids away from school. That again affects our way of life. The one thing that I didn't see that I think some people may have alluded to, but I didn't see this overtly, is the deterrent effect. The TSA got bashed a lot on the discussion, the Transportation Security Administration, they got bashed a lot on the discussion boards, a lot of it rightfully so, and I should give full disclosure, I used to work at TSA, so I can definitely see some viewpoints. But the one thing that's not discussed when talking about the TSA is their deterrent effect. We don't catch someone. We brought up the federal air marshals and not arresting a lot of people, and the TSA doesn't discover a lot of bombs in suitcases that are being checked in. It doesn't happen very often, but they deter how many people. That's the bigger question. Are we better in a society, or is it better security that we have a TSA and that not some that it takes increased amount of planning and effectiveness to destroy an airline in flight? Have we deterred people from doing that? Is it better that someone jackass who's non-trained and non-planned doesn't get to blow up or hijack airlines? Are they deterred from doing that course of action? And is that because of the TSA? That's the one thing that I don't think was captured on the discussion boards. And it's the question is how much of our Homeland Security budget, how much of our fusion centers or law enforcement actually serves as a deterrent that can't be measured by statistics and arrests and all those other stats that come out. So that's one key piece. On the other kind of piece is existential threats change, and I love the current example. For those of you who haven't been following the news, Al Qaeda has essentially taken control of Fallujah, Ramadi in Iraq. Back in the day when George Bush was president, we were told quite emphatically that Al Qaeda presented an existential threat, that if they took over portions of Iraq, they would present an existential threat to our country. Those were the words back in 2003, 2004, 2005. Now Al Qaeda has taken over that territory, and the question is that an existential? Do they now present an existential threat to the United States? I don't think so. That's my personal opinion. But others may differ. But it's just kind of funny how that term existential threat has varied over the years. So overall, we're going to see this theme, and I'm going to give full disclosure. You're not going to be tested on this. It's not going to be part of your final. You're not going to even have a paper on it. But that theme will weave its way through the rest of the course. When we talk about WMD terrorism, when we talk about terrorism strategy, when we talk about leadership targeting, when we talk about things like detainees and hostile interrogation techniques, the question is that hostile or that interrogation technique, is that worth it because terrorism presents an existential threat? Is it worth it to do leadership targeting without due process and trials because terrorism represents a certain existential threat? I'll let you decide that, but that theme will wind its way through the rest of the course. So, preview this week. This week is we're going to talk history. We're going to talk history in quite detail. For those of you who don't like history, this might be a little bit, I'm not going to say painful, but it might be a little bit arduous to go through this history. I personally love history, and I could talk about history of terrorism for the next 8 weeks, but for this week, I'm just going to give you the high points. So you have the Hoffman chapters 2 through 4, as well as the 4 Waves of Terrorism article. that cover the history in quite detail. And the history will be back from the 1880s, when the origins of terrorism, modern terrorism, occurred, to about the pre-Al-Qaeda time frame. So you'll have a pretty good perspective. And we're also going to talk 2 case studies: the Irgun in Israel following the Second World War, and the FLN in Algeria prior to, or in the late 50s and early 60s. And we're going to show how those 2 cases used publicity and tactics that they used to actually achieve their objective. And those case studies will be discussed in detail, and those are part of discussion 1. The other thing I have for you is what I think is the best documentary. I think it's the best documentary of all time, and it's certainly the best terrorism documentary out there. Is One Day in September. The one thing I would warn you is do not watch that if you got small children in the room, because there's a couple of scenes that get pretty graphic. So it's a great flick. It's definitely one that if you got, you watch with your spouse or watch with any adults, but if you have the kids who are under 12 years old, wouldn't recommend them watching that documentary. But what I want you to take from it is, the German failures in providing security to the Olympic Games, and that becomes very relevant now that we have the threats to the Winter Games next month in Russia. But you'll see, and it's pretty obvious, not only do they fail to provide security, but they fail to actually conduct a competent counterterrorism operation to liberate the Israeli athletes that were held hostage, and that eventually resulted in their death. And then the second thing is, you would see how terrorists use media. They use the media, they use the world stage, they use the fact that the Olympics were the first live televised event, and they use that to advance their cause. I mentioned earlier in my Myths of Terrorism that terrorism is much of a publicity stunt, and it works to bring publicity to your cause. And this is a prime example of how a terrorist organization was able to do that. And then the second discussion is, what is a terrorist? And we're going to, you're going to see it in the lecture. You're going to see it in chapter 1 of the Hoffman book. And it's going to ask, why do we consider certain terrorists, someone a terrorist, another person a freedom fighter? There's going to be a discussion section. There's 5 scenarios, or 5 or 6 scenarios, where you ask, okay, tell me if that's terrorism, tell me if it's something else. And so give a quick, yes, it's terrorism, and explain why, at least on the discussion points. And that discussion point will lead us into the Adobe Connect session for Thursday. So I appreciate you guys' efforts in the first week. If there's any questions or problems or issues, please let me know. And if not, I will see you on Thursday.